Hey everyone, no pushing. Everybody, there's seats plenty for everyone. So come on in. We are sorry we're getting started a minute or two late, but we were getting some logistics straightened out. But my name is Chris Barry. I am with Been There, Got Out. My partner Lisa Johnson is here, and our good friend Charlie McCready in the UK is here. And we're going to get started. I'm going to talk as little as possible because we are limited to 1 hour today. We've got some questions, and then I'm going to be sort of the MC, and I'll be watching the chat. So if you have any questions, we'll put them in the chat. If we can get to them, we will. We are recording this session, so know that if you do turn your camera on, you would not be like included in the recording. It's just going to be the speaker. So don't worry about that. But it will be available afterwards. So on Charlie's YouTube channel and eventually on Lisa's and mine as well, you'll be able to access this recording as well as I believe this is the fifth. We were just talking about this. It's the fifth in a series, and it's been really well received. So we're just going to keep going. We'll see where it takes us, and you guys are going to be a big part of that, us figuring that out. We will have a Q&A at the end, time permitting. So, without further ado, let me turn it over to Charlie to introduce himself. Take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris, and welcome everybody this evening or this afternoon, depending on which part of the world you're in. So my name is Charlie McCready. I'm a parental alienation coach, and I basically help parents to navigate the complexities of how to deal with your children when they're going through alienation, and also how to help you, because so much of the time we get very traumatized and stressed out by this whole experience, and there's lots that you can do as well. And the great thing is that during this series with Lisa and Chris, we cover everything. So, it's a really informative set of webinars. Lisa, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Charlie. And I'm Lisa. I always say I'm the female half of Been There, Got Out. Chris and I are partners in life as well as in Been There, Got Out. And we are high conflict divorce strategists who work with men and women all over the world in the worst custody battles in particular and co-parenting hell as well as divorces. And we try to save you as much time and money and energy as possible going through the process itself and beyond. We specialize in something called legal abuse, where a person's ex is using the legal system to wear them down and bleed them dry financially. And our first book, I'll dash it if I did my clutter. Yes, our first book was about that topic. And then just a couple of months ago, our second book came out. It's called When Your Ex Turns the Kids Against You. And we realized that parental alienation is baked into legal abuse. It is one of the most common forms of post-separation abuse. So we are so thrilled to have Charlie as a collaborator in this series of webinars because he does different things than we do, but we really support each other. And so today's topic is something that I think we both have a lot to say on. We both tend to be very chatty, as does
Mhm.
Chris, and we will try to rein ourselves in. But Chris, we're ready. Just take it away with the questions.
All right, for sure. So the first one we had was why do children refuse contact with an alienated parent?
And I think I was going to run with this one. Um, so yeah, basically, this all starts off with something that is called the loyalty conflict. And this is where one parent, the alienating parent, is encouraging the child to take sides, and they start putting a lot of pressure on the kid. Now, this is um, from the child's perspective, this is a very unnatural position to be put into because the kids are intuitively or innately wish to have a relationship with both parents. So even where a parent has a history of psychological abuse, domestic abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, kids still want relationships with that parent. So, and we've seen that, and there's all sorts of research that supports that. So to break away from a parent that they had a loving relationship with previously just shows the sort of pressure that this kid is being put under. So it's not the kid wanting to break away from you, it's because they feel that they have to break away from you. But also, and I've talked about this on several of the other webinars, but I'm going to repeat it here again. There is this thing called pre-alienation. And th this is where this whole sort of campaign to get your child to start siding with the other parent. So, it can be negative criticisms that have been building up against you that you might have been unaware of, even before some of us became separated or divorced. It can start, very, very early on in the relationship. Um, but very often the campaign begins before you're aware of it. And so what I describe this as is like a volcano where the pressure is building in the background over a long period of time, and we don't see it. We all know the story about the Romans in Pompeii, where they're all getting on with their lives and everything seems quite normal, and then suddenly there's smoke, and then there's this volcanic eruption, and everybody's caught off guard. But the preparation for that had been going on for thousands of years, but it wasn't visible. And alienation is very similar. So a lot of the time it really catches us unprepared because we've not seen the signs of what's been going on, at an earlier point in time. But what's happening with your kid is this loyalty conflict. It's been building, the pressure's been building, and they now feel that they have to align with one parent. And this is very counterintuitive because you would imagine that the kid would align with the parent who's kindest to them, and we call ourselves like the safe parents, but they don't. They align with the person who is causing them the most pressure and the most challenges in their life because they know that if they don't align with that person, they're going to be that there's going to be consequences. It might be that as severe as that person cutting the child out of their life, but often it's more subtle psychological consequences. Um, what I also link this to is safety, because the kids stop wanting to see us because they no longer feel safe because of the pressure that's been put upon them by the alienating parent. So it's really a series of coping mechanisms that they're adopting in order to just keep themselves safe and secure. So we have to kind of look beyond that. But what we also see happening all of the time is there's various catalysts. So things happen, events happen that tend to increase the alienation, and very often we'll see the kids refusing contact because of one of those things. And there's some big triggers out there. So at separation, that changes the dynamic between the relationship between us and our partners. Very often that can kind of shift a gear in terms of the alienation. So that can start the pressure for the kids starting to want to not see us. Um, Anything to do with court, because that places the alienating parent in a position of vulnerability, and they want to get this back. So they want to hurt us, so they use alienation. So often we see that the alienation increasing at that point in time. Anything to do with money. So we often see with the amount of time that a parent has with a kid, the more time they have, the more that we then have to pay them maintenance, child maintenance. So quite often it's a transactional issue that's going on as to why the kid doesn't want to see you. But also it can be other things like if the child is beginning to have pressure put on them and you try to take actions to rebuild the relationship, that's going against what the alienator wants. So guess what? They ramp up the alienation again. And there's another one, which is if you get into a new relationship with somebody else. And they're basically five big triggers. And very often, those are the root causes as to why you're suddenly seeing a big change in behavior in your kid. So be aware that this is all happening for reasons. It's not happening out of the blue. It's very much premeditated by the alienator. But do remember your kid doesn't want to be in this position. They're not doing it because they don't want to see you. They're doing this because they feel that they have to.
And in a lot of ways, when you're dealing with the kid who's in that position, you're not really dealing with your kid. You're dealing with
Mm.
a kid that's had like a computer virus installed, right? So, how do you document? Like thinking about, we're going to take some legal action at some point, and we're going to start documenting when contact is refused. How do we go about that?
Yeah, so that's something that Chris and I get asked all of the time. And I think in our last webinar, we were talking about um, the different alienation factors. So there's 17 that come from Dr. Amy Baker. The Baker model is often used to build an alienation case. And Chris and I always say we don't even want to use the word alienation. There it is. There's about co-parenting with a toxic ex. Um, but we want to really focus on your ex's patterns of behavior over time and the visible impact it has on your relationship with your child or on your child themselves. Because often kids in this situation start doing behaviors like regressing, getting really aggressive. They change how they normally are, which can be a little tricky because often with teenagers they can change anyway. But in terms of documenting when contact is refused, so Ashish Joshi is a domestic violence attorney who specializes in alienation. Chris and I are actually going to get to meet him in person next week, hopefully at a conference. But he talks about in his book called Litigating Parental Alienation, which we love, and he's just coming out with a new one. He talks a lot about something he calls the Clancy method. It's not a real thing. He just calls it this because his mentor's last name was Clancy. But it's basically in three different columns. And so the first column, he says, when you notice, so let's say we're talking about refusing contact. Either your ex doesn't let you see the kids physically during your parenting time, or let's say it's a FaceTime or a phone call and you're blocked from communicating with them, or you've been talking to them on social media through other channels and suddenly that's cut off. So the first column, you want to put the date that something happened. And then in the second column, and actually sorry, let me back up for a second. In that first column, we often relate it to one of those um, alienation factors. So for something like refusing contact, we'd say refusing contact or refuse contact on this date. I should also note that let's say you're supposed to have FaceTimes with your kids and your ex claims that the camera's not working and they can't see you. We would document that because we know, especially from even talking with Dr. Amy Baker, that a child wants to see any age. Like she talks about how we have wallpaper on our phone, not so we remember what our loved ones look like, but we feel good when we look at pictures of people we love. So if your ex is blocking your photographic image, say when you're supposed to be talking, blocking the camera, that should be noted because in a way it's trying to make the child forget what you look like and try to make you seem like more of a stranger, especially if this happens regularly. So, first column, the date and the alienating factor, like blocking contact or blocking communication. Then the second column, you would do a brief description of what happened. So, let's say I'm thinking of one of our clients who over time, he had been talking with his two kids at the same time. His ex kept saying the camera wasn't working, and then it started moving to the kids say they don't want to talk to you, and then it moved to the kids are saying they hate you. So each time he would document what had happened, a little description like when I tried to call, I couldn't get through. When I tried to call, my ex just hung up the phone. So you want to put that in the little description. And then in the third column, that's the evidence column. So that's where the information can be located because Chris and I work on so much of like court prep. So you always want to have two different types of documentation, one hard copy, like in a binder, and so in that column, that third column, you'd mention, let's say, what page, or you'd make like a table of contents, like how somebody could easily flip through and find that exhibit that shows what happened on that day. And if possible, you also want to have a digital copy of your documentation with, if possible, hyperlinks to show where the information can be found in a digital folder. And this saves you tons of money with an attorney and other court professionals like a GAL, a guardian ad litem, or some other kind of custody evaluator. So this is how we help our clients save tons of time and money and energy as we make you as super, super organized as possible. So you're not like relying on your lawyer to figure it out themselves.
Yeah, these situations are not often addressed effectively by taking a big box of stuff and dropping it with a thud on your attorney's desk. It doesn't, you have to be much, much more active. Charlie, did I interrupt you? Were you trying
No,
to?
don't worry. I was just going to add to something that Lisa was saying, which was when we're trying to have conversations with our kids, and a lot of the time, the alienators are basically saying, the camera's not working, or the kid doesn't want to speak to you, and but they do all these other tricks as well. So you know, they very often these calls are on the alienating parent's phone, and the loudspeaker is on, and they're physically present in the room. And when you've got an alienated kid with the alienator, they're a completely different version of themselves because they basically have to be totally conformist. And these poor kids, you can see them when they're having conversations with us, and you might try to ask them a question, and they kind of look up to see,
Hmm.
am I gonna, well, how do I answer this, mum or dad, whoever the alienator is? And it's so divisive. And there's kind of it's a real pity that we can't. I mean, maybe people can evidence that as well. Is that something that they can include? I mean, I think that'd be really
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. That's a great question. So, first of all, in America, in certain states and certain countries, whether you have it or not, there's something called the Children's Bill of Rights. And we learned about this through an interview with an attorney that named Leona Krasner. She was the first one who told us about this because we often think about parental rights, but a lot of places children have rights too. And so one of their rights is that they have the right to privacy, especially when they're talking to one of their parents on the other parent's time. And I also interviewed an attorney named Yoni Leveretz who talked about how you can put a clause in your parenting plan saying that the child shall have a right to privacy. It might be a little bit hard to enforce, but it is something that you should consider putting in a parenting plan. And then we can talk about later stuff with strategic communication. I also want to note, I'm so glad you mentioned this, Charlie, about the privacy thing. We have had a couple of clients very recently say that when they've been on calls with the target parent and the alienating parent is hovering, they'll start typing things. And one of our clients has a really young son, and he just kept typing like a little heart. And then another client who has a teenager was saying that his daughter was writing, typing things like, "Can you just type in the chat, Dad? Like, can you just type?" And he was like, "Why should we type?" He didn't understand what was going on.
Mm,
So
mm.
keep in mind when kids it seems like they're typing gobbledygook or little symbols. It's because usually the other parent is there and they know they can't talk.
It's like being a hostage, and they're
Yeah, it
trying
is being a
to,
hostage.
like, I remember seeing this movie when I was a kid about this pilot that got shot down, and he was held a prisoner, and he would blink his eyes in Morse code to get, a message while he was being interviewed, talking about how America was bad and all that, by his captors. Anyway, that's not why we're here. Um, but I put, if you're interested in that Children's Bill of Rights, I put a link. It's from a guy named Robert Emery, Dr. Robert Emery, and it's gotten a lot of traction, ratified by some states as like guidelines and things here in the US, but a lot of attention around the world as well. So there's a link to the Psychology Today article that's most often cited for that. But very relevant. Charlie, let's go back to you. All of this emotionally on children must be horrific. What's that experience like?
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge. So we were talking earlier about kind of there's this enormous amount of pressure put onto the children. Um, and kind of examples of this include things like false choices. So one of the things that parents do, and this I I think false choices are pretty horrendous. They encourage the child to decide whether or not they're going to see you or not, or they encourage the child to make decisions about, what contact they're going to have with you. But it's a false choice because the child knows that this is not something they really have options about. So the child's not getting to choose. The child has to choose the option that the parent wants them to. And this is one of the reasons, when you're speaking to your kids, especially on those video calls or anything like that, they can't answer you. They have to get the choice that the parent wants. But very often we don't see them on the video calls. We're just receiving messages back by text, or they'll be with us, but they will have been groomed in advance and told, when you can't see this, you can't see the other parent. And this puts tremendous pressure on the kid because they want to see you, they love you, they want to have the relationship with you. And it would just be much easier for them if the alienating parent were to say to us, as the safe parent, no, I'm not going to let you see the kid. But instead, they go through this psychological game of saying to the kid, well, you get to decide. And very often we see when there are court orders that come in that then say, well, actually, no, the kid's not going to have the choice anymore. It depends on the age of the child. But the kid's not going to have the choice anymore. The children are so relieved because it's like, whew, I've just been lifted out of that loyalty conflict again. So I don't have to make those choices anymore. Um, but children feel incredibly guilty in being involved, having to not see us, knowing that they're hurting us. And this is something that I think sits with them for a very, very long period of time after the alienation. And it's one of the reasons that children don't like talking about alienation. It's one of the things that we should all make a conscious effort to avoid. But other stuff is going on. I'll just touch upon two more. So there is something called cognitive dissonance, which is basically uh, a child is being told two different versions of reality, one from the alienating parent, and they hear another version from us. And kids and we would be the same. We would become psychotic if somebody was drumming two different versions of reality into our heads. And that's really difficult for the kids to tolerate. So what happens at some point in time when the pressure becomes too much, they do this thing called splitting, which is basically they polarize. And that's when you start seeing the kid aligning with the alienating parent a lot more. And very often that will be the point in time, it's back to that volcano thing. That is the trigger point where the child splits, aligns with the alienating parent, and very often that's when we start seeing them not wanting to have the contact with us. Um, but another example of how the alienators kind of work on these children is the process of adultification or parentification. It's basically the same thing, where they're empowering and emboldening our child to kind of feel like they're an adult. So it kind of fits with the false choice as well. They'll say things like, "Well, you're 16 now, or you're 17 or 15." Sometimes it's really young. You get to decide what happens, but um, they're also giving them court documents, you know, but selective court documents, extracts, the bits that are very damning on us rather than the whole document itself. Or they'll involve the kid in finances. They like to do that a lot, make the kid or give them a story that is about how bad we are and all the bad things that we're doing with finances. Um, just with the court stuff very quickly, because I think this is really relevant for all the stuff that Chris and Lisa do as well. When you're writing stuff, be really careful about how you write it because it's going to end up in the hands of your kids because they're being adultified. And very often parents can say things in these documents that, are 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 essentially saying that the child is being brainwashed and they no longer have any independence. And this just goes straight off to the alienator who then uses it against us. So kind of when you're writing these things, just be careful about how you word it in a way that it's not going to go down badly with your child. But just to finish on that point about that experience, just that last point about the adultification. When children are adultified, it changes their relationship with not just the alienating parent, but all adults. And we often hear from schools, if our children are of school age, most of them are when they're getting alienated, and we hear the schools saying things like, "Oh, your kid's really mature," and what they're really saying is, "Your kid is treating the teachers like a peer because that's what they've been told, that's what they've been taught to do at home." And our kids often end up parenting the alienators, very
Mhm.
often who are playing the victims. And so we end up with these children who come back to us in a very different mindset. Sometimes they come along to us and they want to start parenting us, which is like a really weird thing. So you're like, no, 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 I'm the parent, not you. Um, so there's a lot of complexity going on in terms of the child's experience. And I think this is why, and we'll cover this a bit later on, but this is why it's so important for every parent to go off and really learn about the detail of alienation so you know what your kid is going through, because then you can start working with that child and helping them a lot more effectively. But you kind of have to understand, like, seeing the world through their eyes in the first instance.
And it's a bizarre view when you do see the world through their eyes because it's not intuitive or normal, but when you understand it, you can at least plan and know how to react and take steps to counter it. So understanding it, totally agree, is super important. Lisa, kicking back to you, you and I tend to focus a little bit more on some of the legal stuff. So what do the courts need to understand about these situations?
All right, I really liked how Charlie started talking a little bit about that. And Charlie, when you talked about the kids seeing it at some point, Chris and I usually talk to our clients about how you're always writing to your ex, but you're writing for an invisible audience, like a judge, a custody evaluator, a mediator, a child's therapist. But I wasn't thinking you're also writing for your child as an invisible audience who is probably going to get this in their hands. So that is really, really important. And Chris, we need to make sure we say that moving forward, that the kid is part of that invisible audience.
Yeah, and not to interrupt, but I was also thinking during that response, it's not just what you write, but I think we kind of know not to have like some horrible name on your cell phone as the caller ID. But I used to have a ringtone that was like death metal. When I get a message from my ex, it would be like some horrible growling guy like saying about the end of the world or whatever. So don't do that either. Back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. So I was writing down all kinds of things when Charlie was talking that I think add more to what courts need to understand. And I'm thinking about actually a really close friend of mine whose story is at the very beginning of our book. I have known her for 20 something years, and as we were putting the book together, I was having breakfast with her one day, and I hadn't even realized that she is an adult alienated child. And she told me that her parents had a very horrible divorce, and her mother got remarried to her stepfather. And her mother used to get really, really upset with all the court fighting, stuff over court. And so she was called into court, and the judge asked her when she was 12, I think, 10 or 12, what do you want to do? And she said, I will do anything to make my mother stop crying. Her father then got that message and signed away his parental rights. And there's a lot of things that happened after that. Part of that included him constantly trying to send messages. He wasn't allowed to have any contact with her because he had signed those rights away till she was 18 legally, but he always tried. And it's something she's now, I think she's in her late 50s, but she has regretted this for the rest of her life. Like, saying that to the judge. She had no idea the impact it would have, which reminds me of when we actually got to meet you, Charlie, in person. Chris and I were at a conference that had to do a lot with the voice of the child when it comes to court issues. And there's a lot of debate about how much we should listen to the voice of the child. There were certain people at the conference who said that that it's really important to pay attention to what a child says. And there are other people who are saying you need to look at the context, the broader context. It can't just be what a child says. And there's a woman, an attorney who's also a guardian ad litem or custody evaluator that we met at that conference named Crystal Wright. And we did an interview with her that we're just starting to push out to our clients. It's on our, I think, or it's not yet on our podcast, but Crystal put the link in here. Her name is Crystal Wright, and she was one of the people that practically leapt out of her chair and said, what about when it doesn't work out? If a child says, I want to live with that parent, let's say the alienating parent, and then they change their mind, we have to think about what the benefit to a child would be if they're saying, I'm going to completely cut one parent out of my life, a parent who's been loving, supportive, no history of any abuse or neglect. Why would a child do that? Like, what's going on here? And to have the adults intervene and not just have the world led by what the child wants at the time when they don't even have a fully developed frontal lobe, so they're not making proper judgment. Also, in terms of what the courts really need to understand, and this is something I spoke to Crystal about during my interview with her, was how do you deal with kids who are teenagers or old? Like in America, in the state of Georgia, it's the only one I can think of where at 14, and Crystal corrected me because I thought at 14 a child could just decide which parent they want to live with. That's not necessarily the case. But where there's a lot of weight given to what a child wants, like how do we deal with that? So Crystal talked a lot about the importance of in having a parenting plan or having forensic investigators speak to the court about what happens when there are these kinds of dynamics and how when a parent is not supporting the child's relationship with the other parent or perhaps blocking that contact and communication, we need to come up with enforcement language, deadlines, consequences, and one thing that we think that I'll probably talk a little more about later is something called case management or judicial oversight, where if that person is keeping the kid away, whether it's just emotionally or physically, there need to be other professionals who are checking in on a regular basis because we always want to make sure that the process of, let's say, when there has been a rupture in a relationship, that the process is successful to try to repair that rupture. And Chris, of course, and I know some of the people who we know on this call have heard me say this just a couple of hours ago. Can you get the link to the interviews with Dr. Premila Deck? So Premila is probably our country's most significant person in the area of reunification and alienation, high conflict family dynamics. She's a lawyer turned therapist, parenting coordinator, expert witness, and reunification therapist. And she goes around the country training, and maybe even the world, training professionals in what to expect from this. And she talked about how it is so necessary to think about what can we do to try to work on these relationships. We're not talking about, obviously, like where there's been extraordinary abuse or neglect. But we keep in mind the child is half of each of you. And like Charlie said, they're curious about who they are. And even when children have been abused, there's this longing to still know the other parent sometimes. So it's a very complex issue. And I don't want to keep going on. I know I have to leave time for you, Charlie, too.
But I think there's something
Lisa,
really,
which, sorry, the Premila Deck one, the one you just did or our original?
Our original, but we can put the one that we just did that's kind of
Okay.
like a little infomercial too.
That's right up my alley, both just like
Just
excess.
throw it in there.
Yeah.
I think that the reunification stuff is really interesting as well, Lisa, because um, one of the things that I guess there's a couple of aspects to this. People should be really careful about who they're getting as their reunification expert because a lot of these individuals, they're doing reunification. They are skilled, they are qualified, but they're much better at dealing with things like estrangement. They're
Yeah.
not really equipped to deal with alienation. And
Charlie, sorry to interrupt, but let me tell you something. As we were interviewing Premila and another professional in this area, they said any therapists that take insurance probably are not skilled at alienation.
wow, that's huge.
I know.
Because I was going to ask if she had expressed any views about the because one of the challenges of alienation is that if the alienator is still present in the relationship and basically, the kid might be living which is what's typically happening, that kid's living the majority of the time, or at least a certain amount of the time with the alienator, but they're in their lives, they're involved. And this kid is often brought by these people to the therapy session.
Mhm.
They're kind of groomed in advance and prepared. Then they have the session, and then they go back into that environment. And that doesn't seem to work very well. Did she express any opinions about kind of no contact with the alienators or like best practices? Because I think that's so important.
This is really interesting, and I jotted it down because I was like, how am I going to tell this little story about like this crazy victory with one of our clients this past week where there was alienation going on. It was an extreme situation. The court completely flipped custody. So our client ended up getting physical custody, a significant chunk of legal decision making, and
Mhm.
his ex now has, he was asking for supervised. Um, his ex now has very limited, but then since she did have a little bit of the visit, she started sending the most insane messages in writing that our client got a hold of. And his lawyer said, I have never in my entire career gotten such strong evidence. So we can't wait to hear from him to see. I have a feeling this person is going to end up on supervised visitation.
Mm.
But in terms of what can be done, that's like a big topic. And in Premla's interview, she talked in the longer interview, she talked about some of the ideas. The main thing is that she wants to have the opportunity to work with the alienating parent and hold them accountable for certain behaviors. So, for example, she talked about how when she sees them as a family, and a lot of times she does work as almost like a family systems therapist where they're working with both parents, not just a child and not just a target parent. She'll work with the alienating parent and say, okay, we all want the child to have a healthy life, a healthy emotional life in particular. So, as part of that plan, I am going to need you to show that you support the child's relationship with that other parent. Now, of course, the alienating parent doesn't want to do it, but having that case management, they have to. So she talked about how she would have the target parent send a card or a letter to the child either every day or every week, and the alienating parent would have to film themselves giving it to the child every morning at breakfast, like every day, because even though the parent doesn't want to do that, the child seeing the alienating parent giving the card, it almost is like an indirect, well, I am supporting the relationship because I'm doing this. She says it really does change things, even though, of course, it's no quick fix. But I love how she mentions roping in the alienating parent as part of being accountable to doing certain behaviors.
Does she ever see the alienating parents like really change? I mean, are they just conforming because they have to conform, or are these? Because the thing that we see all the time with narcissists is that they're traumatized individuals. They're very stuck. They don't want to face the trauma. I'm just really interested to know if this actually helps these people to get better because they are clinically, diagnosably, mentally ill.
Yeah,
Does this actually help these people? Which would be brilliant if
I
that were
know.
the case.
All right, so I'm going to flip the question because I asked her that question. I said, I didn't say it like that. I said, do you have success stories? How do
Yeah.
you know something's successful? She said, all the time. But she didn't talk about success with the alienating parent. She talked
Okay.
about success as progress, where there's an improvement in the relationship with the alienated child.
Okay.
She
Good.
said she almost, I think almost always, and you guys can take a look at that interview. She sees progress where first there's been no contact and then the doors open and then like little
Mm.
by little it starts improving.
But I think it's in our years and years of doing this, I've never heard anyone even claim to say I work with somebody so that they're not a narcissist anymore. That's not the world we live in. It would be nice. I started fantasizing there about like, in the Dr. Seuss book, the Sneetches, they have that star on, star off machine that we could take all the narcissists and throw them in one end of the machine and have them come out not narcissists, but that's not our world.
Yeah. Oh, wait,
Uh,
before you go on, Chris, so about Charlie's thing,
yeah,
one thing that I think does make a difference sometimes is that these people care about appearances, like I'm a good mom or I'm a good dad, so I'm going to follow the rules. And so I think performatively, they may behave differently because they
that
want
that was that was very much my experience. And like, narcissists are still human beings, right? And they all have different personalities that manifest differently. So there are these consistent behaviors, but they do have their individual traits. And I was, I'll say, lucky enough to have one that is, as Lisa said, very concerned with how she appears. Her self-esteem is propped up by being perceived as a great mom. So as a result of that, she does do some good things that she thinks will help her be perceived that way. So uh, I wanted to jump over, Charlie, to like what parents can do that actually makes things worse. Like that, we see that all the time in trying to solve the problem, we end up making it worse.
Absolutely. And this is something, first of all, as parents, we most of us have done this, but please don't beat yourself up about it because, you know, we weren't born with some like natural skill to navigate parental alienation. In fact, no, nobody at any point in time in our lives typically ever told us this thing even existed, let alone how to navigate it. So we make mistakes. And one of the biggest mistakes that we make is our need to have love and validation from our children. And this drives a lot of the actions. So in positions of alienation, you've already got a kid who's who's under a lot of pressure. And what we then do is we come in with, I need to fix this relationship now. I need to know that you still love me. I need to know that, you still respect me as a parent, and you're kind of telling me it's not respect me as a parent so much, but it's kind of, I need to hear from you that I'm a good parent because right now I feel that you don't love me and you think I'm doing all these bad things. This doesn't help the kid because it's us feeling very insecure and very vulnerable ourselves. And it's so important for us to think about how am I showing up for my kid? So, and when I say showing up, it's not just in a meeting, if you're having meetings with your kids, it's like, how am I communicating with my kids? So, text messages, one of the things we tend to do is over communicate because we feel quite desperate. We're feeling in a state of loss. So we bombard our children with text messages, with phone calls. And this is a kid who is having all this pressure put on them not to see you. And what we're doing is we're making the situation much worse. So the thing that's counterintuitive, and a lot of alienation is very counterintuitive, is to rein back some of these communications that you're giving the kid. So, don't text them every single day. And it really depends on the situation. We need to tailor, you know, your unique situation. So that's what I do in the coaching that I do. It's like tailoring what would be the best thing for you. But just generally rein back your communications. If you've only recently stopped seeing your kid, kind of text them every 2 or 3 days. Don't text them every single day. Don't ask them questions because they can't answer your questions. Don't don't put lots of pressure on them to go and meet you all the time. Also, you'll find that they don't like so learn why they're doing stuff. This is the whole point about learning about alienation. You'll find a lot of the times your kids won't reply to your texts, and that's because they can't. They kind of feel there's this unspoken law of, well, I can't stop my mom or my dad sending me a text, and the alienator kind of understands that that's going to happen, short of blocking you. And sometimes the kids feel they have to block you to keep themselves safe. So that's one of the consequences. If you over communicate, you might get blocked, which is much worse than having some degree of an open channel with the kid. But don't 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 put lots of pressure on them in terms of like asking them questions. Don't phone them all the time because they won't answer you because they don't want to have a conversation because guess what? You're going to ask them a bunch of questions. So it's much easier for them to stay just in text mode. And if they don't want to respond to you, give them the space. I think that's the most important thing. Learn to give your kids more space than feels natural to you because that's going to take the pressure off them. But also think about what you're doing as a parent because this showing up that I was talking about, we have a great need or a great desire to to have demonstrable evidence that our kid still loves us. And I promise you, your kid does love you. Your kid does want to have this relationship with you, but they don't feel that they can have this right now. So just know that in your heart. It's really, really important because it makes you stop feeling so desperate. It makes you stop feeling so grievous. Just having a little bit of confidence, saying, okay, this is just a transitory period. I can get through this. So you have to switch your behaviors and become the parent again. Because what happens to us is we become this very needy person. We need the love from our kids. We need validation from our kids. Our kids can't give this to us. And when we put pressure on them, that pushes them away from us. What they do want is they just want you to be the parent again. So they want you to give them unconditional love. Doesn't matter what they're doing. If they're not responding to you, give them unconditional love. If they're being rude to you, it's a coping mechanism. Give them unconditional love. Also give them unconditional support. And the unconditional support is compliment them, encourage them, say nice things to them, because the world that they're living in with the alienator, all that stuff is very, very conditional, which is the kind of the root of how powerful alienation is. Everything that the child receives is conditional. And this is how the alienator is controlling them. You know, if you don't do what they, if the kid doesn't do what they say, they'll have some of their privileges taken away. They'll have love taken away. They'll be criticized. You know, there will be consequences. So recognize that's what's going on, and just give the kids some space. And I know that that sounds like really counterintuitive, but it's the best thing you can do. And if you don't, you're going to end up pushing them away because they're being put under more pressure. When you take the pressure off, what you'll find is the kids, when they can, they'll start coming towards you. So you'll start becoming a little bit more magnetic.
Sounds
Wow.
good. Lisa, did you have something to add there? Do you?
No, no, I'm dead. Charlie just mesmerizes me with it does sometimes. Just like makes so much sense.
So do we want to take, I'm just looking at the time. We have a little more than 10 minutes left. I don't think there are any questions that really should be, asked to the group that I saw. Do we want to try and tackle one more? Can
Yeah.
we be like maybe a little
Oh
less?
wait, it looks like a question might come in. So,
Yeah.
Charlie, we had a few more. I've been texting Chris going, let's skip the other questions just in case. But is there a question, Chris? I saw it looks like somebody was saying that that she has a question.
Yeah. Well, so. Oh, okay. So I think the question is relates to outcomes and things that happen in alienation cases of some of the bad things that could happen for adult children. If you're the one who asked that question, can you nod like you're asking, do they get like into crime and things like that as adults, like the children later on? Yeah. So the question relates to the was about like becoming criminal, like kids having bad outcomes in life. It was more about crime, but I know from working with both of you that there are other things as well. So what if alienation is left unaddressed and kids don't get help, what kind of bad outcomes can they have? And then let's also try and finish on a more positive note. So like
Well, yeah, well,
that.
we have. I saw another question came in that I was already looking at our books. I'm like, oh, we have that. I mean, Charlie, I don't know if you want to talk about outcomes for when this is unaddressed.
When alienation is unaddressed,
Yeah, like
well, it's
the impact
Yeah.
on a child.
kind of it's a bit of a catch-22 because yeah, even when alienation is going on, you could kind of say it's not being addressed because ultimately the 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 mechanisms in place to protect children, and you guys are incredible in terms of making them a lot more effective, but the mechanisms in place to protect children are not as effective as they need to be. And so, you know, a lot of the times the system actually enables the alienation to take place, which is shocking. And in the extreme cases of alienation, and I'm just going to be really kind of honest with parents because I believe in honesty rather than covering things in rose-tinted spectacles. But in the worst case scenarios, some parents do lose contact with their children forever. And that's one of the saddest things that can happen. And those children are they're severely psychologically scarred for pretty much the rest of their lives. And it's going to impact their relationships. It's going to impact how they feel about themselves, their self-perception. It's major. But thankfully, for the majority of cases, that's not the outcome that happens. For the majority of cases, the children do end up reuniting with us, but they still have psychological scarring. And it still takes, a long time, even once you start rebuilding the relationship with the child, it still takes them a long time to deal with the impact of what they've been through, how they've acted with you. They feel really, really guilty. They feel the sense of loss that we have as well. They're still very confused later on in life. Um, they get very messed up as well with things like money, because a lot of the time the alienators are very focused on money. So the relationships with things like money can be a bit messed up. And the unfortunate thing is, they don't want to speak to us about alienation, and they don't want to ask us how we can help them to go through their healing process. So they're kind of self-reliant to go off and find counselors and therapists. And I think one of the biggest shames is that very often the children don't want to really recognize that they've been alienated, which is why they don't want to have the conversation with us. So I don't think that these kids are going off and having the conversation they should be having with a therapist, which is, I was an alienated kid. And the problem is that the therapists are not trained in alienation. So the kid's not identifying it, and the therapist can't deal with it. And they're just like having this general conversation about, the way they perceive themselves or the trauma that they've been through. But I think we need a group of therapists who are equipped with the right skills to be able to help kids like identify what are the specific emotions, what is the specific trauma that you've gone through as a result of alienation, because it's not like general trauma that people go through in their childhoods. It's very specific. But it's really sad. It does scar kids.
No
Yeah.
doubt.
I think in the interview with Crystal Wright, I asked about, we were talking about types of experts to have on the case. And she was saying, from what I remember, you want to tr find therapists that specialize in teenage trauma, young adult trauma. So that's where you can get started with looking for therapists who specialize in that age group with trauma. In our book, we have a chapter on finding the right professionals, because I know there was a question about how do you find a trauma or the right kind of therapist. And we have lists of questions to ask a therapist, and also as well as an evaluator. But one of the first questions you can ask before you hire this therapist is, um, how do you sorry, what's your experience with high conflict families dynamics? Like, tell me about that. Have you ever worked with a family where it looked like one parent was turning a child against another parent, and how do you determine that? How can you tell if it's just happening, let's say it's natural development from adolescence, or if it's another parent's influence? And then we always like to ask for, and I'm just going really quickly because I don't want us to run out of time. How do you determine, or sorry, what's a success story? Like, what kinds of treatment do you use that actually helps in a positive way? Is it possible? And just hear what they have to say. One of the questions that Chris and I always say that people should ask attorneys well into the conversation is, how would you handle a case like mine? Because this shows that you're not just saying, oh, do you have experience with parental alienation? But I've described our family situation. How would you handle it? This way they can show you, like, are they actually familiar with stuff like this? And what's their strategy? What's worked in the past?
100%.
Yeah.
All
So I
right.
have a
Well,
feeling we're going to be passing some of these questions for the next one, Charlie, but this is
I
great.
I've already jotted a couple. They came into the chat just a little late to, go ahead and open a whole new topic. But one of the things, we did have a few people arrive after the start today. So, Charlie, how long? I know you're going to be faster than us, but how long till this will end up on your YouTube channel, just roughly, for people who want to see it when they get home?
I would say Tuesday.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Wow. Okay. That's way faster than us.
Yeah, we'll be asking you about your VA and how do we contact them. Just kidding. Uh,
She'll,
so,
she'll be doing the work.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, Lisa, I'm actually stunned because since Lisa and I met, and we are a romantic couple also, but we've right from our first date, we've run out of time, and today we haven't run out of time. So,
Well, we have run out of time because we have four
we're,
questions that we want to talk about that we will
we're
carry over into the next one, which I think we'll maybe start with, Charlie, is like, what can people ask for from the court and how to stay connected when a child is refusing contact? So that's probably going to be the meat of the next one.
And I have to say, I love this format, guys, because it's such a it's so complementary. It's beautiful the way it works because parents are having to deal with both, that the actual, okay, what am I going to do with the kid? But dealing with the court as well is such an important part. And it's I think this is about the only place that parents can come where they get both angles at the same time. It's something really unique and amazing that we're doing here.
Yeah. No, but and thanks guys for coming and listening. I think education is so important.
Mm.
I have a little button that I never can find when I need it. It's from my old high school English teaching days, and it says, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance.
Yeah.
Ignorance is what destroys us. So the more you know, the more you can strategize and deal with this in the best manner possible, in and out of court.
Yeah. And something I wanted to mention as well is we started doing a survey some time ago. So we started it, we were running the survey, or at least we were asking for contributions back in April time. And we are incredibly thankful for everybody who contributed. So we got over 2,640 responses, which is phenomenal. And that is actually scientifically, I think when you get more than 2,100, you can then extrapolate that across a population.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's amazing. But we're working on that survey at the moment. So I asked a bunch of questions to people. There are some really good responses, not just in the standard questions that we gave, but there was some sort of free space answers at the end, share your experience. And we're just kind of going through all of that data at the moment, creating some of the kind of the stories, the experiences that parents have had. But we want to use this as a mechanism to kind of demonstrate and provide further evidence, that this is a very real thing that we've all been going through. And there are various lobbying groups in the US, other parts of the world, who are pushing for change. So we're hoping that this will be something that will be, another tool that they can use to put in front of the decision makers and say, look, this is really real. This is a scientifically strong response rate from people, and uh, we try to do it in a way that the answers will be robust and compelling. But it really shows we're all going through very similar experiences, which
Yeah.
we're not surprised by, but it's powerful.
Yep. And Chris and I always think about stuff from the ground up. And I remember meeting Evan Stark, who's the author of the book on coercive control. And he talked about how, everyone says the system has to change, system has to change. Yeah, it does, but it's going to take so long to do that. But in the meantime, people learning how to argue persuasive, compelling cases,
Mhm.
which anyone can learn, really. It takes work, but you can learn it. That's what makes change from the ground up. So the most important thing is you can learn how to hopefully get what you need to get from your own case. And it is not easy, I know, especially for some of you here to have to keep going back again and again and again. But those of you that don't know, I was in court for about 10 years with my own case, and I got some of those gut punches, but I just kept going back, and Chris was with me that whole time pretty much, and things started to change. So
I
we
think
just
that's I think
keep
that's a
on
really
going.
important point though, because we're basically what we're sharing is a huge amount of information with people in the course of the series. And as Chris said at the beginning, this is our number five. We're showing a huge amount of information in terms of frameworks, experience, insights, guidance, but ultimately everybody's got their own individual case, and that's where I would encourage, parents to reach out to each of us according to the support that they need, because that's when we can really help them a lot more by tailoring to their specific situation, and giving you, okay, this is the stuff that's really going to work for you. And so, I would encourage everybody who listens to this and the recording, do think about getting support, because it's the best investment you can make in yourself. I'm not saying that as a pitch. I'm saying that as, people, because I know you guys are really kind of, you're so invested in helping people as we are. And it's like our mission is to help parents through this. That's why we are here. And that's what we all want to do.
Yeah. Charlie, how could people find you?
So they can find me on charliemccready.com, or if you just go to Charlie McCready, pop that into, YouTube or Instagram, um, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, pretty much any of the social media channels, you'll find me.
Yeah.
And
And
how do we find you guys?
easy. So beentheregotout.com, social media at been there got out. On YouTube, it's all together. On Instagram, which is our home base, is the little underscores between been there got out. And we've got the books. Just look up Been There, Got Out. You'll find us. We have a course coming out this summer, fingers crossed. That's like a semester long. It's called the Alienation Master Class, How to Protect Your Relationship with Your Children in and out of court. YouTube channel, like 360 plus interviews on the podcast with all kinds of professionals, lots of stuff in alienation, all free. So, and it's just Chris and I. So if you ever want to reach out directly, just Lisa at or Chris at beentheregotout.com. We always answer.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Charlie and Lisa, if there's anything else you need added, that'd be great. But thanks for joining us, everyone. And we'll see you next time. Charlie, you need to end the recording on your side. I do not have those controls because it's local.
All
Cool.
right.
Cool. Thanks so
Thanks, you
much for
guys, for
joining us,
coming.
guys.
Yeah, we'll see you in a few weeks.
Cool. Bye.
Bye.